That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about White Hot, the rise and fall of Abercrombie and Fitch, which will be released on Netflix April 19th, 2022. It is the 6th documentary directed by Alison Klayman.
What else has Alison done?
She was, her first documentary was Ai Weiwei,
Weiwei?
Never Sorry, about the Chinese activist and artist in 2012, which won a jury prize at Sundance. Since then, she's done The Brink, that Steve Bannon doc, which got a lot of attention. And just last year, she had that exclusive access to Alanis Morissette and directed that film about her called Jagged.
Well, this documentary is well put together. I often criticize docs that don't have like key players involved, and I do appreciate that this one does have a lot of people who were integral to the issues that are brought up. Except the main, so it's mainly about the former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch and their like creative director who declined to participate. But other than that, I think it's very well put together. But I mean, the title tells you what it's about: the rise and fall of Abercrombie and Fitch from like the early '90s until like Mike Jeffries, the former CEO, left in 2014. So basically that time frame. And their biggest issue was their business practices, which really failed them because it was very clear. I mean, the title White Hot, that they were selling a version of Americana as being like attractive white young people. And at a point that became problematic. It sort of came to its zenith when Mike Jeffries gave an interview and basically talked about how he didn't want his clothes to be for everyone and made some really problematic comments that just are bad for business.
But that was in 2006.
That was in 2007. And then there was a blogger, Twitter type person in 2014 who retweeted his comments, and those went viral. And then within a very short amount of time took down Abercrombie and Fitch after the CEO just left. So there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. It brought me back to a time and feelings that were uncomfortable because this, Abercrombie and Fitch was very much something that I was aware of as a teenager and something that I felt very much was not for me.
And of course, I felt the same. Like I was in college, late, junior, senior in high school, and then in college when A&F was super hot and everyone was wearing it. And I remember the first time I went into a store and the first time I saw one of those shopping bags with the nude guy on it, and immediately realized this was not for me. Nothing in the marketing, nothing in the imagery in the store, the people working. The first store I went to was at the Forum Shops at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And something that got the stores in trouble, or the company, is that they were hiring people at a very specific look, like white people. So there was not a lot of diversity inclusion in front-facing employees, and then obviously the marketing. And that was very clear walking into the store.
It's immediately clear. But also, back then I wouldn't have been able to articulate it, but how kind of homoerotic all of that is.
Well, let's talk about that. But first, I didn't know, because I didn't care, that Abercrombie is quite old. It started in the late 1800s.
1892, I think.
And it catered to like elite sportsmen, read rich white men.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Old rich white men. And they sold like sporting equipment and
Ernest
like
Hemingway,
fancy shavers and all that shit. And then the man whose name I don't recall now, who owns like the Limited and Express and all that, he bought Abercrombie and Fitch and then brought on Mike Jeffries.
Yes.
To revamp it. And he revamped it to what we all know it to be back in the 90s and early 2000s. Mike Jeffries, the former CEO, is an old gay white man.
Kind of like a vampiric homosexual, yes.
Yes. Who they were describing as very handsome.
Yeah, they kept saying how handsome and fit he was.
I was looking for pictures. I didn't see it. I don't know who they're talking about.
He kind of looked like that Gary Busey mode of...
Well, he had a lot of bad plastic surgery, so that's where the Gary Busey... But then, yes, as a younger person, I think he does look like younger Gary Busey as well. Then, Mike Jeffries brought on Bruce Weber, a noted fashion photographer, who's also an old white homosexual. They're both creeps. Mm-hmm. Bruce Weber has been sued for sexual misconduct.
By many people, yeah.
They mentioned that he was never convicted, but did settle a couple cases. So, like you said, this shit is so gay, and it's so strange to me. I mean, there are many things to talk about, but one thing that really just keeps glowing in my mind is like, they really cater to like frat guys, like straight white frat dudes. And I'm just so curious, like, didn't y'all think this shit was so gay? Like,
they had no idea. Just like
all of the advertising.
Go ahead.
Well, no, they would have those quarterly like catalog magazines, and it would just be like naked guys, lots of butts, lots of nudity. I mean, no frontal, but it's like, and then lots of attractive men with no clothes on, like wrestling and romping around, like.
Because it's sold under the guise of heteronormativity. And I think it's interesting, what I was struck by from this documentary is realizing just how gay men were kind of in charge of how women, styling women, how they look through studio era Hollywood. That we have them defining what is sexy for young, white straight men as well, but it's also gay.
Yeah, the influence of gay men on fashion, beauty is interesting.
But how race intersects with that is interesting, because there's a man in there, the one who painted the murals, who says he talks about Bruce Weber's like photography book, and he's like, oh, every gay man I know owned that, and it's like,
not me.
Every white gay man owned that.
But that's a good point, because the thing that really bothers me about Abercrombie and Fitch, looking back on it, is everything about their marketing was like, we're selling all American, but all American to you means white, like, and not even all white people, like good looking white people. So all you ugly white people should also be bothered by this. Like, it's just so like. It's one thing, fashion is different from, we look at Versace ads and Dolce & Gucci, whatever is popular and expensive. Yes, these are like otherworldly looking people, but there's diversity in it, right? Mm-hmm. We're just looking for exceptional beauties who have impossible bodies. And that's a separate topic.
That's a separate problem, yeah.
But at least there's some diversity to some degree. Maybe not body diversity, but for Abercrombie and Fitch to, like, it's just so hard to hear, like, over and over again, like, all American.
Well, in the way,
and then as a person sitting there realizing, like, well, I don't look like this, so what does that say about me?
Well, in the way, like, I was really struck by the woman named Carla, who's one of the people in the class action lawsuit.
The black lady?
The black lady.
Oh, yes.
Who was beautiful. And how Abercrombie and Fitch responded with that white lady on TV saying, like, well, they're just not pretty. It's like,
yes, the language after they had been accused was like, oh, it's not that we don't hire non-white people, we just are looking for pretty people. And it's like, damn. So now it's like
a slap in the
I'm being discriminated against, and you're calling me ugly.
And you're calling me ugly.
And yeah, she was beautiful, or is beautiful.
Yeah.
Some other notes. Someone commented about their marketing or recruiting practices, and sort of like the pre-influencer marketing or pre-social media marketing, which basically involved a lot of these stores were near college campuses. So they had a tactic of approaching white fraternities that were mainly white guys, and finding like the hottest, most popular guys in these fraternities, and either trying to hire them or give them a bunch of clothes so that then people would want to
emulate them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's all about being aspirational, right? I mean, that's what fashion is.
Aspirational. It struck me watching this how insidiously Aryan Nation all of that is. It's just this collecting of specimens, and this is what we want to reflect.
I don't see it as insidious as that. I think it's really more what you said earlier. I think that you have this gay white man who is instilling these two gay white men, these two old, ugly gay white men who are instilling like their version of beauty, and then it infects an entire culture.
But that's what's insidious, is the infection of it, because how things are marketed to people, it's everybody wants to be like everybody else, so it's everybody chasing each other's tails. And if you decide not to be part of that, as in, I was a young white person that refused to wear Abercrombie and Fitch, you are an outsider. And also looking back, it struck me, like, with kind of really articulating the gayness behind this, is I felt the same way moving to a big city, a primarily white gay city, and feeling kind of the same sense of, oh, I I couldn't put my finger on it, but it's like, I don't belong here in the same sense that of walking into an A&F store.
I hear you. I think to me it feels less insidious because it feels like that version of like a lot of gay white men who feel like it's okay that they state their preferences. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's not that I hate black people, I just don't want to date them. Or it's not that that Asian guy is ugly, it's just I prefer this white guy.
And they don't belong in my store. Or
So
my
as a
club.
result, like I'm excluding you. So it is a problem and it's hurtful. But I mean, do I think that Mike Jeffries is racist? And no, I think he's just like, I'm not trying to defend this man. I'm just saying that I think it's more about people think that their version of like what is better is really hurtful sometimes.
Well, he might not be racist. I think he is, but he's a pig.
Sure. And I don't know that he isn't racist. I'm just saying the reason I'm saying it this way is because I think we have to be very careful because little things can turn into big things, right? Like, especially with fashion. I mean, look at where we are with body exclusion, right? So I think this story is something that seems harmless, right? Because the way they're describing it in the beginning is like, well, this is just our version of what we like. Sure. But you're selling it in such a big way and your tactics are so aggressive that you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And then the impact of that.
It seems like such a small thing, but like I was recalling all kinds of memories from the early 2000s that I haven't thought about for a while. That and MTV and all of these images we were sold and that were normalized that I don't know, I think are toxic.
Speaking of MTV, they do mention that the brand really took off after LFO released that song Summer Girl.
Which I didn't know.
I'm very familiar with that song. And then it has a line about Abercrombie and Fitch. They also, talking about racial discrimination, it wasn't just against having non-white people working as front-facing. Because they would hire non-white people, but they would all work in the back, like stalking. They wouldn't be allowed. And then after the lawsuit that settled out of court with some sort of decree, they got around having to hire more people of color to work in front by changing the name of the descriptions. So then they called like stockroom people something else, like reactors or something. And then they called the people who worked in the front models. Mm-hmm. So because they were models, they were able to say, well, we have to hire people who look like our ads, and all our ads are still white people. So I thought that was very interesting. But the other sort of problematic thing involving race was they used to make these graphic tees.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And with really offensive imagery and copy, particularly against Asians, Spanish-speaking people, like just outrageous to look back on now. And there's one woman in the documentary who used to work for the brand in the 90s, and she was like a stockholder. And the way she talks about it is like, oh, I can see why this shit happened. Because you're just this white lady who thinks like, well, people thought it was funny.
People thought it was funny.
And when they told us it wasn't, we just got rid of it.
We just burned them all.
Like, that's not
we
how...
We tried to correct it. But it's like...
It's like trying to correct it is like, no, trying to correct something is like thinking about what you're doing before you do it. Right. Not just do this bullshit and then when you get your wrist slapped, you just... Because she said, oh, whenever that would happen, because it would happen often, they would just burn the inventory. Like...
Right. There were... So again, going back to Carla, I really felt for her when she was deciding to become part of the class action lawsuit, because what happened to me, was that bad enough? Yes.
Yeah, that was interesting.
And that is a thing. And
because she does say like when it was brought to her attention that she may be able to participate in the class action lawsuit, she thought, I don't know if this is bad enough. Like, it's not like anyone, like I knew I was being treated different because I was black, but it's not like anyone called me the N-word in the store. But then it's like she brings up a good point that it doesn't have to be that.
No.
Like, they did a lot of little things to her. They lied to her. They took her off the
microaggressions.
Yeah, yes. Microaggressions. Like, when you add them all up, it's just as bad as being called the N-word.
Well, yes. And again, that's a place where marginalized people often have to, I think, struggle with thinking that. And because we're always taught that, like, just get over it. Also, the man that was hired out of this...
The chief diversity officer.
I felt bad for him, too.
Because he's a little tight-lipped, and I appreciate that, because he seems like he's like maybe in his early 50s, so he still has a career ahead of him, and of course he doesn't want to like tarnish that by talking crazy about his previous employer. But I could tell that he was frustrated with what happened. And he did say in the end, because he declined to comment on some things, but he did say in the end, like, listen, did the brand look better after I left than when I started? Yes, I feel good about that. And I think, I'm sure you were going to mention, oftentimes in situations like this, when diversity and inclusion is an issue that companies struggle with, who do they hire? A black person, or a woman, or a gay person, or another person of color. And that's a lot of responsibility for one person who probably is just a symbol and has no real power.
They become a scapegoat.
Yeah.
A scapegoat. It's a loser's errand. It's just like them talking about how it was okay to have all those Asian stereotypes because there were Asian Americans working in the design department. And it's like, well, they said it was okay. Like hiding behind that. It's like, oh, well, we have this black man that's part of D&I, so we're good.
But the reality is, like, I work in, an area where, like, things can get made without very little oversight and mistakes can happen. I don't think that's my issue. My bigger issue is, like, as consumers, we have a lot of control over how we spend our money. And I think, what I was thinking, this video is going to be long. I was thinking about, if you go to, like, an area that's predominantly black, there are a lot of hair shops and beauty supply stores, and those cater 99% to black people, specifically black women. And of those stores, 100% of them are not black owned. So, and it's a problem. Like, systematically, just the people who are selling to primarily women of color are not people of color. So in that instance, we don't have a lot of control over how we spend our money. Because if you want to buy a bundle, it's like, what are you going to do? You have to, you just have to buy it. There are distributors who are black, so maybe seek out, black people who are distributing the hair. But really at its core, the money is not coming or going to black people. So it's like, we don't have a lot of control. But with fashion or like food or restaurants you go to, it's like we have control. And I just think, like, I don't want to spend my money somewhere where I'm not being represented. Like, clearly, whatever you're doing here is not for someone who looks like me, who lives like me. And I think that's how I felt after finishing the documentary. Like, and even the black lady, Carla, she was saying how her mom was talking to her like, girl, I don't know why you're surprised they treated you like that. I don't even know what you were doing working in that store.
Everything about that store screamed that we are not,
right.
We don't want you there.
And that's how I felt about the store. And that's why I think, like,
it's like those idiots that don't want to make cakes for gay people.
To me, it's like, let them.
Okay.
Don't shut them down. Let them do that, and then let's see how their business goes. If a lot of people support them, then it is what it is. Or maybe,
well, Chick-fil-A or any other.
So people have a right to spend their money where they want to, and if they're, I don't know. It gets complicated because if certain businesses take tax dollars and they have to represent, and you have to follow rules, because there is a woman who successfully settled against A&F because they wouldn't hire her and they stupidly told her because of her hijab. That's illegal. So it's like, you can't do that. That's just like bad business. It's so stupid. And then your excuse is like, she doesn't fit the brand. Well, guess what? Like, you're not, like, it's illegal. So there is a line, and I'm not saying
but
people
again,
should do whatever they want to.
But again, also, it's like, so A&F has now been revamped by this new
CEO.
Fran Horowitz, was that her name?
I think that's her name.
But it's too late. It's just like the homophobic cake makers. It's too late. Even if you change your tune, I don't want it. I don't want your cake. I don't want your clothes.
Right.
Like,
to be fair, if a 15-year-old gets on ANF.com and they see the diversity, like, if you go on there now, you'll see plus size people of color, a lot of like queer representation. If a 15-year-old who doesn't understand the history sees that and feels like it's for them, then that's great.
I think that's different though.
Right. Because someone like me, no, I don't care what you do.
When you're old enough, for our elders as well, like, when you grew up with something, I'm tainted against that. It doesn't need my money. There's something else that fits me. But I'm also very anti brand anyway. I don't like wearing brand name clothing. I don't need somebody else's name splashed all over me. I will advertise the people I want to advertise.
Well, that's, like, there's so much to talk about. I think, like, being a walking billboard for something that doesn't even align with your beliefs seems odd, but I also understand it's complicated, right? Because if you're young and there's peer pressure, you want to fit in, it's all okay to a degree because we don't have a lot of control. But,
well, I think that's the blessing and curse of something like social media is A&F would not have been able to do what they did without that, with social media, because that's ultimately what took them down.
Well, maybe that's a good thing about how we live now is there's a lot of exposure and, you know, people, there's a lot of transparency and things disseminate very quickly. So it kind of keeps people on their toes and making sure that what they're doing is appropriate.
On the surface. Yeah.
But anyway, I thought this was a well-constructed documentary. If you want to be disgusted, I would say watch it. I mean, there's nothing...
It's unfortunate and interesting, and I think that it's an important document of maybe one particular thing that seems really small, but it really does speak volumes to a time and an era as well, and feeds into, I think, that same sentiment about what makes America great is really what these people were selling. And, you know, just the uncomfortable kind of things going on behind the scenes that are gay people doing.
Wow. This. I'm just rambling now. What would you give it?
I would give it 3 out of 5.
I would give it 3.5 out of 5. Anything else?
No.
Listen to our podcast. Bye.